Optimal minimal.
At this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Now would seem an appropriate time.
What if I did the opposite?
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over a metal endoskeleton.
This episode of The Tim Ferriss Show is brought to you by Athletic Greens. I get asked all the time, if I could only take one supplement, what would it be? The answer is inevitably Athletic Greens. I view it as, and a lot of you now view it as, all-in-one nutritional insurance. I recommended it way back in 2010 in the 4-Hour Body, and I did not get paid to do so. I've been using it since before that, and I use it in a lot of different ways. I travel with it to avoid getting sick, or to help mitigate the likelihood of getting sick. I take it in the morning to ensure optimal performance, and overall, it covers my bases if I can't get what I need from whole food meals throughout the rest of the day. And if you want to give Athletic Greens a try, they're offering a free 20-count travel pack for first-time users. I nearly always travel with at least 3 or 4 of these one-dose bags. In other words, if you buy Athletic Greens as a first-time buyer, you now get, for a limited time, an extra $79 in free product. So check out the details at athleticgreens.com/Tim. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Tim for your free travel pack with any purchase. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn's Hello Monday. Hello Monday is a podcast. Hello Monday with Jessi Hempel is back for season 2, and the show is full of advice, practical, tactical advice that you can start using today. Each week, Jessi sits down with featured guests to investigate the role work plays in their lives, how it can be integrated into your life, and how to make work for you better. This season, one of the first episodes is with Jerry Colonna, who has been called the CEO Whisperer. I've actually done quite a bit of work with Jerry, and he is one of the world's most in-demand executive coaches amongst the startup ecosystem. In the episode, Jerry shares his approach to meetings, explains how to ask good open-ended questions, and he also goes through his approach to daily journaling, among other things. Journaling can really create an incredible competitive advantage and also act as an emotional rebalancing tool of sorts. So I recommend taking a look at it, giving a listen more accurately. So whether you're starting your first job or gearing up for retirement, Hello Monday helps you tackle Monday and the rest of the work week with tactics and strategies that you can use. So check it out. Find Hello Monday with Jessi Hempel. That's JESSIHEMPEL. But you can just look up Hello Monday on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Well, hello, boys and girls. This is Tim Ferriss, and welcome to another episode of The Tim Ferriss Show, where it is my job every episode to attempt to deconstruct world-class performers of all different types, to tease out the routines, favorite books, habits, and so on that you may apply to your own life. My guest this episode is Ben Horowitz. You can find him on Twitter at @BHorowitz, HOROWITZ. Ben is a co-founder and general partner at the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and the brand new Harper Business book, What You Do Is Who You Are. He also created the A16Z Cultural Leadership Fund. If you are wondering what A16Z stands for, just count the number of letters between the beginning and the end of Andreessen Horowitz. So he created the A16Z Cultural Leadership Fund to connect cultural leaders to the best new technology companies and enable more young African Americans to enter the technology industry. Prior to A16Z, that's Andreessen Horowitz, Ben was co-founder and CEO of Opsware, formerly known as LoudCloud, which was acquired by Hewlett-Packard for $1.6 billion in 2007. Previously, Ben ran several product divisions at Netscape Communications, including the widely acclaimed directory and security product line. He has an MS and BA in computer science from UCLA and Columbia University, respectively. So without further ado, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with the one and only Ben Horowitz. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. Very excited to be here.
And I have so many questions. I have pages and pages of questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible. I thought I would start with a name that I know you're familiar with, and that is Andy Grove. That may not be a name that all people know, but could you please describe who Andy is, why he's interesting to you?
Yeah, so Andy was kind of one of the founders of Intel, which is kind of the foundational company of Silicon Valley, if there was any. And foundational not only technologically, but also culturally, I think importantly, and just an amazing guy. Probably, for my money, the best CEO we ever had out here. But, he started his life, he was a refugee from Hungary from World War II. And, he had to escape the Nazis and then the communists and kind of came over on a boat. And I forgot they gave him like $27 when he got to New York. And he taught himself English, and he kind of went to school at CCNY and became a physicist. And then, eventually met up with Bob Noyce. He actually told me a very funny story towards the end of his life where Gordon Moore, who was the famous Moore's Law and the founder, also a co-founder of Intel, when they brought Andy in to Fairchild Semiconductor, the way they picked him out, and Andy told me this very light, he said he finished his PhD at Berkeley in 2.5 years, and Gordon Moore had found that people who finished their PhD quickly correlate with high performers. So that's how he got the job.
Well, that's a perfect jumping off point for about a half a dozen things that I was meaning to get to anyway. But I'll try to ratchet back my caffeine enthusiasm and focus on Andy for a bit longer. High output management. You wrote the foreword to a reprint of that book, which when I lived in Silicon Valley, I was able to observe the rebirth of sort of the resurgence of this book and its popularity. And I know some incredible founders who have stacks of this book in their offices to give away. Why did you agree or offer to write the foreword? And what are some of the takeaways that people might find in that book or that you found of particular value?
Yeah, well, it was my favorite management book by far. In fact, I think it might have been the only management book that I ever read that I liked. So it was, quite a thing for me when Andy called me and he said, Ben, I was watching you give this talk at Stanford. And, in the talk, I was talking about my book, my first book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And somebody asked me why I wrote it. And I said, well, when I was a kid, I read this book, High Output Management, and it was amazing because it was the CEO of Intel, which is like the most important company in technology. And he wrote this book, and it wasn't to say how great he was or like all these books that these guys write who, run big companies and how here's when I learned the value of $1 and then this is when I built a great big company and all this kind of thing they say. But it was a book to teach young people like myself how to manage. So it was just a complete contribution back to the environment with really, in a way, nothing in it for him. And, I always, when I, reading that book, I said, well, if I ever make it, if I ever kind of become anybody that anybody wants to listen to, I'm going to write the sequel to High Output Management. And that was, I tried to do with The Hard Thing About Hard Things. So when he called me, there was no question. I was like 100% I'll write the foreword. But the reason it was such a great book is it was kind of the original hard thing about hard things, in that most management books are like, here's all the obvious easy stuff, and here's 8 random steps to do the most easiest thing in the world that anybody could figure out, who wasn't an idiot. But Andy Grove, it was he went all the way right to the worst, hardest, most messed up things that you'd have to do. So one of the things I remember from the book is he goes, well, hey, look, you're writing performance review. And the rule of thumb is you never put anything in a performance review that you haven't already told the employee, right? Yeah, and you're reading, yep, that's the rule. That's what we do. And he's like, okay, so now you're at the performance review and there's something that the employee needs to improve that you haven't told them. What do you do? And it's okay, that's a real thing. And he's like, do you put it in the review or do you not put it in the review? And, his thing is you got to put it in the review. And it's bad that you didn't tell him, but it's worse to not tell him now. And, and those kinds of difficult decisions, like, how you really do that, or like, it's like, okay, people are late to meetings, they're wasting everybody's time. So stealing money from the company, but it's very awkward to deal with them. And so how do you deal with them on that and that kind of thing, which is really what you need to know to put any of these management techniques into effect, is like, how do you do it when there's real conflict? And, that's why it's such just an amazing book.
So you mentioned the coming to meetings late, and in one of your blog posts, you have some fantastic blog posts and excellent writing, both of course on the web in this case, and then in the books. But you share an anecdote that begins with, for example, we could talk about sort of wartime versus peacetime CEOs, but a basic principle in most management books is that you should never embarrass an employee in a public setting. But Andy Grove, in the situation that you just mentioned, once said to an employee who entered a meeting late, quote, "All I have in this world is time, and you are wasting my time," end quote. Right?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things.
and we'll almost.
And you have to realize when he said that, like, he was like God. So it was like God. So, he's God of Intel, and like you're walking into an Intel meeting, so it's like God telling you that you're wasting his time.
So I suppose the first question that I'd like to ask, and we may end up getting into the wartime versus peacetime CEO differentiation, but what occurs to me is that he has a scientific background. He's an engineering and physics background. You also have a computer science background. How do you think about management? What is, and I know this is a very broad question, but do you think about management differently than many people? It would seem to be that the answer is yes. Also, just based on the observation you had about most management books, which I would agree with. How has your experience, your life experience, maybe including computer science, informed how you approach or think about management?
Well, I think it's, it's an interesting combination, because there's a part of an engineering background that's extremely helpful, which is, can you think about systems, and can you think about how broad scale systems interactions occur, and what the implications are. And then there's a different part, which is a very kind of, I would say, high EQ component, which is, in order to make that system work, you have to be able to see the company through the eyes of the people who are doing the work, which are usually the people who are not in the room when you're making the decision. And you have to understand how it's going to affect them, how it's going to change their behavior, and so forth. Just so as an example of that, it's easy, if somebody comes to you and they say, Ben, I really deserve a raise. And you could go, okay, well, I like you and I want you to like me, so I'll give you that raise. But you have to think about, if you're good at it at all, you go, okay, well, how will it look to the people who are not here? Is that fair? Have they gotten a chance at it? Is this person just getting the raise because he came into my office? Or does he really deserve it? So do I have a systematic process to evaluate talent and allocate the money that we have? Or do I run it like that because I'm not really thinking about it from everybody else's perspective? And so you kind of end up needing both to be good at it. And I think, kind of going back to Andy screaming at that employee, that's kind of a little bit in the balance, right? Because, that employee is definitely going to be ashamed and horrified and maybe demotivated by him publicly embarrassing him. But in that instance, what he was doing was something different, which was he was setting the culture and saying, look, culturally, fundamentally, I'm going to teach everybody in this company a lesson by saying something that's so powerful and so colorful that it's going to spread like wildfire through my company. And everybody's going to know that it's not okay to waste people's time by being late for a meeting. And that's more important in this case than the individual. So it gets, it's kind of a Confucian approach. The good of the individual must be sacrificed for the good of the whole. And you have to do that as CEO from time to time. Now, you don't want to do it gratuitously, because that is definitely going to hurt somebody's feelings. So, and maybe that's a great employee or whatever, but you do, and particularly if the culture is in place and they're kind of willfully ignoring the culture, which I believe is the case in this case, then you have to kind of value the system and value that above that person's feelings. And these are kind of the trade-offs that you make in management. And that's why it is complicated to get it right. And why, like, it's not, it's always like broken down in management books are often is like you're talking to one person at a time. And that's never the case. You're always talking to everybody.
If this is a useful distinction, I'd love for you to define the two terms for us, or the differences between two terms, and that is management and leadership. How do you distinguish between those two? I know it seems like a stupid question, maybe, but I'd love for you to, if you're able to, just comment on that for a second, or if it's a bad question, we can move on.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of leadership is, or the way I think about it, and they're kind of, my own dictionary of it is, leadership. There's kind of is the art of kind of getting people to follow you, and as Colin Powell said, if only out of curiosity. And I think so that involves kind of, having a vision, being able to articulate it, being inspiring, making, creating a feeling among people that you care about them in a way, and you care about, their goals and objectives and what they want out of life. And people want to follow people who have, some number of those attributes. Management gets more into, okay, you have this great vision, you've articulated, everybody likes it, but like, how do you operationalize it? How do you kind of break it down into its steps? How do you make sure that people who need to communicate are communicating in these kinds of things? So it's kind of, a lot of leadership is, knowing what to do, getting people to follow you, and then management involves getting people to do what you know. And that's a kind of a little bit of different part of your brain. It's, leadership's a little more on the creative side. Management's, requires a little more discipline and systematization.
So on the former, in the case of leadership, getting people to follow you, if only out of curiosity, and this may not be a fit, but in the course of doing research for this conversation, I came across mention of a paper called Good Product Manager, Bad Product Manager.
I wrote that when I was a little kid.
Yeah, and it seems like, at least the way it was phrased in this Fortune piece, it quote, became a Bible for the startups, in this case referring to Netscape, for the startups' unpolished young executives. So could you describe that paper and what impact it had on you and or the people around you when it came out?
Yeah, so it's funny. It was a piece I wrote out of pure frustration. So turns out like product manager is a weird job in Silicon Valley in that in every single company it means something different. And so like what you do doesn't really translate well from one company to the next. And many companies have just bad product management functions. And so, the people that I kind of inherited when I got the job to run the team, all had these like differering and weird views on what the job was. And I always found myself like yelling at them, going like, does that make any sense to you? That kind of thing, like I was like at that level of frustration. And then, one day I was just like, I have to train like the team on what I want. And I was like, but I don't have time to put a training program together. So I sat down, and I just wrote this document, Good Product Manager, Bad Product Manager. And then the thing I had in my, head was like, and it's a bad thought, but it was like, this is going to be like dog training, like bad dog, good dog, bad dog. And so that's where the name came from. But it was really just, like this is what good product managers do, and this is what bad product managers do. And just like, let's just be clear on that. So like, you can anticipate what I'm going to say if you do something bad, and we don't have to have that conversation all the time. And so that's all it started out to be. And then what happened was kind of, as you said, is like people valued just getting that information so much that not only did my team use it, but then everybody at Netscape started using it. And then a huge number of people, product managers in Silicon Valley still like refer to that thing, which I wrote in 1995. And what it taught me was like everybody, no matter how smart they are, no matter like if they went to Stanford or Harvard or whatever, they can always use training in the job that you want them to do, because the job that you need them to do is one, these jobs are very complex and they, and they're different. And a lot of it is, what do you expect as a manager? And so if you're a manager who doesn't train your people, I can't imagine you're good at your job, just because there's no way they're going to be able to read your mind on everything.
So I'd like to talk about more lessons learned, and then I'm going to segue from that into how you might teach others, because in a lot of ways you do teach others. Let's chat about Bill Campbell. And Bill Campbell has come up once before on this podcast when I had a conversation with Eric Schmidt, legendary figure known throughout the Valley as coach, has advised people like Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, and so on. Could you share what your relationship was like with Bill, and what some of the things, or any of the things that you really absorbed from Bill?
Yeah, so he was just such a great help to me as CEO, and a lot of it was just being able to have a conversation with somebody who knew what I was talking about, and who knew what they were talking about, at the same time, which is when you're a CEO, it's just very difficult to have those in a way, that's kind of confidential and like not with like somebody who could like remove you and that kind of thing. And so he was just invaluable to me in that sense. And a lot of what was so great about him is, so on the one hand, like we could argue about whatever, and like he would have input, and like maybe I would, listen to it, maybe I wouldn't, but it would never, whatever I did never affected the relationship. It was just that kind of thing with him. But the thing that he did better than anybody that I've worked with is he could really see the company through the employee, like through the eyes of every single employee. He knew how people would react to every single decision. And, and he wasn't even running the company. He would just come in once in a while and so forth. He'd know enough people in it. But he had just like this incredible sense about that. And that just proved to be very valuable. So I'll give you an example. So, we had done this giant deal with EDS to sell them we had this business that was going to kind of basically make us bankrupt. And by doing the transaction with EDS, we kind of escaped bankruptcy and then kind of launched into this other business, the software business, which eventually became worth $1.6 billion, or I think that was it. So it was like probably the most important deal we'd ever done as a company. And, we do the deal and I go, Bill, we got the deal done. I can't even believe it. We're going to announce it. I got to go to New York on Monday and we're going to announce it. And he's like, no, you can't go. And I was like, well, why can't I go? And he's like, well, when you do the deal, right, this deal is going to involve selling some employees to them, laying some people off and so forth. As soon as that news hits, you got to be in person in the company talking to the employees and letting everybody know where they stand as quickly as possible. And I was like, oh, of course, he's right. I hadn't even thought that through. And had I not done that, so I did that. I sent Mark to New York to do the announcement. But had I not done that, had I not kind of stayed back and had that conversation, I don't think we would have made it as a company, because that day ended up being pivotal, to reconstructing the trust that I needed to kind of run the company going forward. And, that's the kind of value that Bill added. But if you want to know who he is, the only person I've ever met who's could do the thing that Bill could do is Oprah Winfrey. And I know that sounds probably weird in a way, but like Oprah Winfrey can like meet you and talk to you for 5 minutes, and she can know you as well as somebody who's known you 10 years. And Bill could do that too.
That's so wild.
And yeah. And you may have run into somebody like that, but it is amazing.
What do you think is behind that? Is it an ability to see behind the words and just deeply empathically sense more about your core personality and what's shaped it than other people? What allows an Oprah, for instance, to do that? Do you have any theories?
Yeah, so it's definitely a combination of things that I don't possess. So it's a little hard to read it, but she kind of can read in every signal you're sending. So like the tone of your voice, the expression on your face, like the way you're holding your hands, everything like is complete high fidelity information to her. And then she knows the exact right question to ask to get to the deeper level of what's going on. And like I've seen her do it. I've seen Bill do it. I learned from it, but like I like literally don't have the capacity to do it anywhere near their level. But yeah, it's some combination of like they're able to just process way, way more information about a person much, much faster, and then great retention on like the 1,000 people they've met before that might match to that. And it's super impressive though.
Yeah, there is. I enjoy trying to deconstruct the secret sauce, but sometimes it is just impossible to do. I mean, they're magic. Yeah, there's certain people who are hardwired for a different spectrum of perception. On the other hand, there are a lot of coachable or teachable skills, and if we're looking at management, I'd like to shift from, in some respect, student of Bill or advice receiver of Bill Campbell to advice giver. And Mark Zuckerberg has said that you are the management guru to all of the young entrepreneurs in the Valley. And I want to dig into that for a second because, of course, you have much vaster experience than I do. But having spent almost 20 years in Silicon Valley before moving, spent a lot of time with first-time startup founders who, in some cases, have a real tiger by the tail. And many of these CEOs are really great product people with no real management experience to speak of, who have never had this type of game to lose, if that makes sense. What would you teach, or what do you teach or advise someone like that if you have, say, a first afternoon meeting with them or a few hours? They're a new portfolio company. In walks this bewildered CEO who's entering deep waters. How do you begin to cultivate them or advise them as a manager in training, so to speak, or a CEO in training?
Yeah, so they're all different, but there's things that are similar about them, and some of them are good at some things and others about others. So I don't know that there's a kind of thing that I would say to any of them. But, one thing they all struggle with is how to build their team, particularly their management team. And kind of when what you're speaking about, okay, like it's different if, they're not succeeding or whatever. But if they're succeeding and like the company's kind of degenerating because they don't know how to run it, then that usually kind of gets into this whole executive hiring, integrating, managing problem. And this is, first of all, none of them are good at it. Like we've never had a first-time CEO who was good at this. And I know I wasn't good at it when I started. And the problem is, okay, your board goes, hey, you need to hire like a CFO. Like, somebody's got to keep track of this place. It's going crazy. Like, what are you doing? And you go, okay, I'm going to hire a CFO. And you go, okay, hi, and you go, well, I'm the CEO, so I must know how to do that. But you don't know how to do that. And not only that, like you've never worked in a finance organization. You don't even know what the CFO job is. Like I always ask it's like, what's a good control structure? How do you distinguish a good one from a bad one? And they have no idea. And so how are they going to interview a CFO? It's sort of like interviewing a Japanese interpreter if you don't know Japanese. They all sound wonderful, right?
Now, I'm gonna plead ignorance before we get too deep into the weeds. What is a control structure in this context?
Yeah, so just how does money get spent? Do you know every dollar that's getting spent? When money comes in, do you account for it properly? These kinds of things, and how do you do that systematically as the company grows? And people have budgets and all these kinds of things. So you get, so it's just something that they don't know how to do. And they don't know how to say that they don't know how to do it, and they don't know how to kind of learn how to do it. And so I always like to just start with, okay, let's talk about a process for learning how to, possibly at least get a criteria for your company for this position, not like a general, the platonic form of a CFO, because that doesn't exist. But like a CFO for this company right now, what do we need? And then we, how do we do that? Well, maybe we should talk to some CFOs, see what they would hire for us, see if that matches us, see how they would test for it in an interview, and that, kind of get deeper into it. But even as you go through all that, then once that CFO gets signed, how do you teach them about your company? What does day one look like? How do you integrate them? These kinds of things. So it's, it really is kind of has to be a hand over hand instruction. And then once they're in there, if you hire somebody, a lot of times these CEOs will hire somebody who's so senior and so aggressive, because they went for the biggest resume they could find, and the person doesn't want to be CFO, they want to be CEO. And then, that person will start, trying to grab territory from the CEO and all these kinds of things. And you've got politics you've got to handle. And so, it's just a long, I would say, it's not a quick manual. It's a kind of ongoing conversation to understand where they are, what they have to do, how to retain their mojo, all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And, well, I'll start with saying that the hard thing about hard things, your book, one of your books, I should say, is one of the most recommended books that has come up in the last handful of years on this podcast.
Appreciate that.
By what I would consider certainly high-performing founders and CEOs. You mentioned, or we mentioned, high output management earlier. Are there any other books that you would give to a first-time founder who does have a tiger by the tail, who's doing well but clearly out of their depth in this in a new level of complexity with running what is turning into a company as opposed to just a good product?
Yeah, so it's funny. People always ask me, what are the management books you'd recommend? And I'd be like, I don't know. I think that, and it depends a little on the leader. One of the books that I have been recommending for years is a book written by C.L.R. James in 1937 called The Black Jacobins, which is the story of the Haitian Revolution. And you go, okay, what kind of leadership book is that? But it turns out that the Toussaint Louverture, who kind of led that revolution, was basically a management and cultural genius, better than anybody that I've ever kind of read about or learned from. And it just ends up being a great leadership book. I think Colin Powell's book, his autobiography, is very, very interesting on leadership. There's a bunch of, I think, if it's a little company, Eric Ries's book is great, the Lean Startup.
The Lean Startup.
Amazing at teaching you things that, particularly if you've not built a new company before, are just really fundamental lessons. And we see, there have been some things in the news, lately that, about kind of with fat startups, which were kind of all the ones from my era. But, the dangers of a fat startup, I think he really articulates amazingly well in that book. And that is one of the early traps you can fall into, particularly in an environment like this where there's a lot of venture capital money running around.
Mm-hmm. And the job of CEO, I've enjoyed a lot of your writing, and in one of your blog posts, I think the title is "Making Yourself a CEO." At least that's you talk about how the job of CEO is a very unnatural job, and that and I'm cherry picking here a couple of lines, but to be a good CEO, in order to be liked in the long run, you must do many things that will upset people in the short run, unnatural things. How have you cultivated that ability in yourself, or helped others to cultivate a willingness to be unpopular in the short run? I think this at least strikes me as a real critical differentiator. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. So no, that is, you've hit on probably one of the most important kind of leadership skills. And, the easiest way to think about it is, like, if you make decisions that everybody likes all the time, then those are the decisions they would have made without you. So you're not actually adding any value. So almost by definition, a lot of the most important decisions end up being ones that, people don't agree with and don't like and are difficult, and cause people not to like you, at least for a while. And, the way I generally work with CEOs on this is because it's very difficult, because, there's so much emotional, psychological force pushing them to make kind of the wrong decision, the easy decision, the one that is going to be the people-pleasing decision. And a lot of it is just pointing out what's going to happen, letting them make it, and then when the pain comes, go, you remember we talked about this, and this is what happens. And, a lot of it is just, you have to go through making those mistakes to train yourself to, it's kind of like it's running towards the darkness. Like there's this pain and dark area where like people aren't going to like you, it's going to suck, maybe you have to fire somebody, maybe you have to lay them off, maybe you have to make a very unpopular decision to cancel a project or whatever. But if you run away from that, and you always know you have to do it, like you can sense it when you run a company. If you run away from that, that's when you really get a huge raging fire, and that, will potentially burn down your company.
And it seems to me, and I've never run a large company, but just in my interactions with various CEOs and founders, that coming back to the CEO position is a very unnatural job, that there are certain maybe technical abilities or procedural abilities maybe that are pretty easily trained or relatively straightforward, and then there are others that are perhaps less explicitly taught. And one that you've written about before is the ability to manage your own psychology. What tools or techniques have you personally found, or routines, anything at all really, to be useful for cultivating an ability to manage your own psychology? And maybe you could just describe what that means.
Yeah, so I mean, it is certainly the hardest part of the job, because what happens is, and you don't think about this when you're starting a company, it's like one of these, and I always talk to entrepreneurs about this. I'm like, if you knew what was involved when you started, you never would have started. And they're like, absolutely right. There's no way I would have done this. So it's kind of a blessing that you don't know, because if you did know, then, nothing would ever happen. But like the kind of thing that happens is, okay, you have this idea to start a company, and then if you just think about that socially, okay, so then you've got a lot of friends and relatives, and like some of them are excited for you, some of them say that's never going to work, and and you want to prove them wrong and all that. But then you got to go out and you've got to sell people on the idea. So you've got to hire people into this kind of vision that you have, and then you've got to raise money behind it. And like often, like some of that money might even come from like your relatives or that kind of thing. So you've got this money that people have entrusted you with. You've got careers that people have entrusted you with. And you start going, and then something goes wrong. It looks like the company may not work. And so, what's the consequence of that? Well, like every relationship you have, you're going to violate if it all goes down. And that is super scary. Like it couldn't be more scary. And, to not let that thought or that set of thoughts paralyze you is, can be really difficult at times. And a lot of it, first, one of the most important things, which I wrote about is first thing is you can't think in you got to not think the way investors think in probabilities. You have to just think in terms of how do I do this? Like if there was a way out, like which way is out, and train your mind in that direction as opposed to, well, there's a 90% chance that like we're not going to get this deal. And if we don't get this deal, we're going to whiff the quarter. If we whiff the quarter, we won't be able to raise money. If we won't be able to raise money, then I'm going to have to lay everybody off. Like once you start thinking like that, you literally can't function. And so kind of getting around to, okay, I've got one bullet in the gun. I have got to hit the target. So I'm going to do whatever I can to get as close as possible. And then like, we're going to shoot our best shot, and there's going to be no contingency plan and no way out, and no, like if somehow we don't make it, we don't make it, but like, we're going to die trying. And that, getting to that mentality is really the key to being an effective entrepreneur, I think.
What have you found to be helpful for managing the stress of that type of sort of existential threat level, one shot, one kill psychology? Are there any particular habits or types of self-talk or anything that you use or encourage that allow people to perform better under those types of circumstances?
Well, like I don't want to exaggerate how good I was at it because, like I was up at 2:00 in the morning, like in a cold sweat with my guts boiling, like all that stuff. Like, it's not like I didn't have that. So,
right.
I wasn't that great at it in terms of kind of managing it in that way. But I think, the things that helped me were, one, just always focusing on what I could do. Like there were so many things I couldn't do, so many things out of my control, so many things that, like I was in the middle of the greatest technology equity meltdown in the history of the world. So like there was nothing I could do about that,
right.
Although it was hurting me. But it just didn't make any sense to think about those things. So just, really thinking about the things that you can do. And then, Bill Campbell was just very helpful to just be able to talk to him. And, it wasn't like he had any answers either. But just to have somebody that, I could at least get it off my chest. I was like, look, we're in a spiral. And he's like, yep, you're in a spiral. And I was like, okay. I was like, and then here are I think we have like 2 shots to get out, and here they are. And that just at least talking it through and not feeling like I was missing anything. But, I think a lot of people now, they meditate and do other kinds of things and so forth. And I would rep to that, but that's not what I did at the time. So just like sweated it out, and cut years off of my life and all that kind of thing.
It strikes me that one of your superpowers may be running towards the scary things and not away from the scary things, which might result in a lot of acute short-term duress, but it may ultimately result in less long-term duress. Could you explain the line, sharpen the contradictions?
So yes, this is a line. I think this was from actually originally Karl Marx, and he was speaking of sharpen the contradictions between capital and labor, to basically accelerate the revolution. And I definitely think Lenin used it because Lenin was like amazing with rhetoric and that kind of thing. He was definitely a rhetorical genius. Also, kind of wrong about everything and had a horrible impact on the world, but that's a different story. But I like to use it in management because it's a great kind of cue for the CEO, because what happens in an organization is you'll see little disagreements between people, and a lot of your inclination is to smooth things over. But the right answer is usually to sharpen the contradictions. And the reason you want to sharpen the contradictions is because there's information in that contradiction. There's information about how you're not communicating, how the objectives are not aligned, how the strategy might be wrong. And you've got to get that, because that's where the truth is. And so when you smooth that over, if you don't bring it to a head and resolve it, then you miss an opportunity. So it really is it's one of the most important techniques, I think. And anytime, in a board meeting, anytime I hear a little bit of disagreement, or I see an inconsistency in the strategy, that's always my cue to myself. I want to, that's when you get the answer. Now, it's also a good way to start a revolution, so you got to be careful.
So you are not a fan of the default
Bolshevik revolution?
No. Well, maybe that too. But I was going to say you're not a fan of the default backpedaling. Oh no, it's a miscommunication. That type of. Oh no,
that's that is. It may be, but it's probably a systemic miscommunication. You know what I mean? And as opposed to oh yeah, you meant this and you meant that, and so now we're all happy. That's not what happened. That's almost never what happens.
Very rarely. You have a new book.
Yes.
Why write a new book? I mean, you're a gifted writer, but why write a new book, and why this book?
Yeah.
And could you describe what it is?
Sure. Yeah. So, and that's a great question, because after I wrote the last one, I was I'm never writing another one. That was enough.
Right.
So it surprised me, but it's interesting because when I was kind of first learning to be a CEO, one of the and I asked Bill, and I asked a lot of kind of others mentors, what should I focus on? And, a lot of them said, you should focus on culture. But then I said, well, how do I do that? And nobody really had any kind of, it was all these weird abstract ideas that they weren't compelling, they weren't well articulated. And I never, and it was always a grope in the dark for me to try and understand how to set the culture, how to change it. And so I really kind of became obsessed with this question for myself. And, I did a lot of, in my life, I've kind of been interesting about culture in the broader sense. And so, I just really, really, really spent a lot of time kind of going through, history, going through kind of trying to understand how people did it, what were the components. And it turns out to be I think one of the most central parts of management, in that if you think about management tools, there's the mission statement, and there's the OKRs and KPIs, and you've got, whatever your objectives, and you've got, all these kinds of things, but none of them really dictate the things that really define who you are, right? Do you show up on time for meetings? You stay at the Four Seasons? You stay at the Red Roof Inn? Do people go home at 5 or they go home at 8? What kind of company is this? What are all those behaviors? Do you get back to people right away, or do you never get back to them, or you get back to them in 3 days? And all of those behaviors are your culture. But they're how people are behaving when you're not looking. So what do you do about that? And, how do you set that? And how do you make that go? Because that ultimately is really going to speak not only to the quality of your company, but like what impression it makes on the world, right? Like, is it a good company to do business with? Is it a bad company? Is it a place where people work and their life becomes better? Is it a place they work and their life becomes worse? Like, what are all these things? And they're all a result of this like weird abstract thing called culture. And so, as I started working with CEOs, like, of course, none of them know really how to deal with it at all. Like, they have ideas, but most of the ideas are like half-baked and like mostly wrong. So I thought, I should really go back and restudy this problem and see if I can articulate it. And that's what the book's about. And it's called What You Do Is Who You Are, because it's not what you believe. It's not your values. It's not what you tweet. It's not like your social signal. It's like what you actually do. That's who you are. And once you get your head around that, you realize that's a big task.
And the subtitle is How to Create Your Business Culture. And you, I think, alluded to at least one big component of this. But is culture then, as you define it here, like a shared set of behaviors and beliefs? Or how would you suggest people who are listening to this perhaps change how they think about culture or ask themselves questions that'll help to refine their thinking if they're CEOs or founders of a company, for instance? Yeah,
so one of the greatest, most longest lasting kind of cultures in history is this way of the warrior, the culture of the samurai. And you can like that culture or not, but you have to give the credit for the fact that it lasted like over 1,000 years. And to hold a culture for that long is amazing. And one of the key insights from Bushido is a culture is not a set of beliefs. It's a set of actions. And that's really what the culture is. And this is why I think people miss it so much, because they think it's a shared set of beliefs, but it's not. It's a shared set of behaviors. And you don't even have to believe it. But if you behave that way, that's a culture. And this is, what you have to ask yourself is, okay, like, what are the behaviors that show, like, for real, that we're doing what we believe? And I'll just give you an example in venture capital. Every venture capital firm says they have great respect for the entrepreneurs.
Right.
Very few treat entrepreneurs with any kind of respect at all. And so you go like, well, how do you have that disconnect? And it's because they haven't defined, like, what are the actions that translate into that being a real thing and a real part of the culture. And so, this was one of the problems we had to solve when we started the firm. And one of the things I put in place very early on was, like, if you're late for a meeting with an entrepreneur, and I collected $50 today on this, it's $10 a minute. And people are like, well, what if I had to go to the bathroom? I don't care. What if you had to make a phone call? I don't care. And the reason I have it that way is because I want them to ask me, well, why? And when they say why, I say, because, like, building a company is really, really hard. And, if an entrepreneur takes time out of their day to come see us, like, we're going to respect the fact that how hard it is, and we're always going to be on time. No excuses. Plan your day. Finish that phone call 5 minutes before you have to meet with the entrepreneur. Go to the bathroom earlier, or don't drink that 8th cup of coffee, but you need to do what you're supposed to do. And, you have to set these kinds of things in place if you're really going to live up to your ideals. And that has to be across every dimension of the culture. You have to kind of program it in, or you're just not going to have it. Mm-hmm. You're going to talk it. And then if you talk it and don't do it, then your culture becomes your hypocrisy.
Right. Is culture something that you really have to get right at the get-go, or is it possible to do a rehaul and make it work without replacing all of the employees at a company?
You definitely can change culture. You definitely can change culture. two of my favorite examples in the book are one, the Haitian Revolution, where Louverture reprogrammed slave culture into a military culture, which is almost unfathomable in that, like, not only did he have a slave culture, but it was one of the most difficult slave culture. It was a significantly more brutal kind of slave environment than even like the U.S. slave environment. So if you, from the beginning of kind of the transatlantic slave trade to the Haitian Revolution, I think 900,000 slaves were brought to Haiti. At the end, there were 465,000 left at the start of the revolution. In the U.S., 500,000 slaves were brought in that same period, and there were 700,000 left. So like it was like that much quantitatively, that much more brutal. So a very difficult environment of low trust to build like a military force. And he built a culture that created an army that defeated probably at least two of the strongest European military powers in history, France under Napoleon and the British Empire. And so you got to say, absolutely, you can change a culture. And, he used the same guys who were kind of slaves, didn't even have clothes, that kind of thing, to that kind of army. And then the other one that I found very interesting is Shaka Senghor, who was running, a prison gang, a very violent prison gang, and just changed the culture to be like remarkably, empathetic for, it's still a prison gang. So like it wasn't all friendly, but it was a really significant change. And those guys, I've met some of his guys, that he had there as they've gotten out of prison. And it's just remarkable the effect it had on them, not only in that organization, but coming out. So 100% it's possible.
And in either case, in the former, that is at least based on my very limited understanding, was, if not the only, one of the only successful slave revolutions.
It's actually the only slave revolt in human history that ever resulted in an independent state.
What were any of the things that he did that helped with that transformation from slave culture to sort of organized military culture?
Yeah, so he was quite a remarkable guy along these lines in that he was born a slave. So Toussaint was born a slave, but he was so smart that the plantation owner basically made Toussaint, not only he let him read, so he learned to read, and he read things like Caesar's Commentaries, where he learned a lot of his military strategy and some economics books and so forth. But he also made him his driver, and so Toussaint was able to go to all these meetings, on the island. So he learned French colonial culture, kind of Roman military culture, and then he also knew slave culture. So he had this really comprehensive cultural understanding. So he knew the elements of kind of the various things that he wanted. And so one of the techniques he used, which I refer to as kind of create a shocking rule, was he had to solve this problem that trust was super low. I mean, the most difficult part of slave culture is it lacks trust. And the reason is trust is really like a long-term commodity, in that I'm going to do something for you today because I trust that over time, like it's going to pay off for me. But if you're a slave, there's no tomorrow, right? You have no possessions. They could take your family at any point. They can kill you at any point. You don't own your own life. So to build trust in that environment is almost impossible. The way Toussaint did it is, or one of the ways he did is he created this rule, which was basically officers can't cheat on their wives. And you think about that and you go, okay, well, maybe that's not that big a deal. But like you're talking about an environment where like basically soldiers were paid in like raping and pillaging. Like that was like a fundamental kind of thing that everybody did outside of Toussaint's army. But he said, no, look, I need to be able, like, your word, like, is everything. And he had a great line about, he'd rather relinquish his command than break his word. That's how much emphasis he put on it. And like, if I can't trust you to keep that one promise, then you can't be an officer in the Army. And so everybody wanted to know why that rule was in place. And so that kind of starts to build up, okay, here's how much we value you keeping your word. And so that was, kind of one like little aspect that he did to reset the culture. Another thing was he really elevated ethics. And you go, well, like, why is that important? Well, you live with a higher code and you have a stronger bond because it gives you a feeling about yourself and a feeling about the people who you're working with that, like, we're doing something important. And, one thing, he outlawed that end. He outlawed raping and pillaging in the Army. And he said, look, we're after something more important, and that's liberty. And so we're not going to rape and pillage. And it became so powerful that the white women in Haiti referred to Toussaint as father. Like, this is a slave who's running an army. They liked him better than the troops from Spain or Britain or France. They liked the slave army better because they treated them so much better. And there's a great story around this, and it's a legend, so it's one of those ones where we don't know is true. But the name Toussaint Louverture, he was born Toussaint because slaves only had a first name. It was part of the dehumanization process. And Louverture came later, and nobody knows for sure why, but the story is, Napoleon hated him. Like, he drove Napoleon crazy. Napoleon suffered more casualties in Haiti than in Waterloo, and he wanted to get him so badly. And he got his generals around. He said, like, how can you not defeat this slave? And the general said, well, we get him backed up, we surround him, but every time we think we have him, there is an opening. And so his name is Toussaint Louverture, Toussaint the opening. And my belief is that, those people, those women in the town, they helped him in a way that, like, Napoleon could never understand because he had elevated the culture to that degree. So, those are a couple of the things. I mean, I go on for obviously hours and hours and hours on the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, this is something I knew nothing about before doing some homework for this conversation, and I'm excited for hopefully the clarity and with that sort of precise action that the book will bring to something that, like you said, culture in quotation marks is often thrown around as a collection of very high altitude abstract concepts, but without any real plausible next steps. But this really makes the abstract concrete, or it seems that way, that you're both giving examples, historical and current day, of how to install these shared and in some cases rewarded behaviors. Right?
Yes, no, definitely. That's that's why I'm so excited about the book. I mean, I feel particularly now, and you see all these criticisms of high tech culture and, like, this CEO, how could he run a company like this and so forth. And whenever I see that, I'm like, well, it's really hard. It's really hard to get 10,000 people to behave the way you want them to, and like, the default is everybody's culture is screwed up. And it takes a lot of effort to make it good.
Yeah, it makes me think of there's a Ram Dass quote, which I'll paraphrase, but it's something along the lines of, if you think you're enlightened, to go spend a week with your family. And it's like, okay, like everybody should reflect on that when they're criticizing especially I would say a relatively unseasoned or new to the job CEO's ability to get 10,000 people to behave well. It's very difficult. It's very, 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 very challenging. What would you consider success for this book? What type of outcomes would you like to see in the world?
That's a great question. It's funny because when I wrote the first one, my goal was that the CEOs in the portfolio would read it. And that turned out to be a good goal because it was so narrow that I think it forced me to write a specific book, which I think a lot more people liked. On this one, I think that anybody who kind of cares about their imprint on the world, this is kind of the book for that. And I always tell the people at the firm this, look, when we're all retired, like, we're not going to remember like every deal that we did that was good or that we did that was bad or that we won or that we lost or how much money we made or any of that, but we're going to remember like what it felt like to work there and what it felt like for the people who interacted with us, and like we're going to know if we were proud of it or like it's something we want to forget. And that's what culture is really about. It's like, who are you? Like, what do you do? Like, what does it mean to know you? And that, I think it's such an important thing, but people don't have the mechanics for that. Or I hadn't been able to find anything that I could read on that. So that's kind of the purpose of the book.
And I really like that it also, I would imagine, and I haven't yet read the book, but I'm very excited to, that it provides examples that allow people to see principles in action and sort of deduce how those might apply to their own decisions, whether that's, say, Reed Hastings, right, at Netflix, or rewinding the clock and going all the way back to Genghis Khan, who's, of course, I shouldn't say of course, but someone that I've been really fascinated with for the last few years.
Interesting.
For many reasons, and has been really portrayed in a lot of the coverage in a one-sided, sort of one-dimensional way, very unfairly. But the sort of the scale and scope,
underrated.
Very underrated, and the vision of cultural inclusiveness that you talk about in the book as it relates to that, I think it will be really eye-opening to people, and I'm excited about it for that reason. I know we're coming up on time. Be fun to grab a coffee and a round two some other time, because I still have a long list of questions, which we can get to some other time. But let me ask just a couple of really quick closing questions, and then bring this to a wrap. But this question is sometimes one that is difficult to answer, but I'll lob it out there and see what we get. And that is, if you had a billboard, this is a metaphor, of course, but a billboard on which you could put anything you want, an image, a question, a word, a quote, but it allows you to get convey something to billions of people. Non-commercial. What can you think of anything that you might put on such a billboard?
So this is just really off the top of my head because I was listening to this song this morning. But my friend Nas has this great line, which is, I know you think I'm rich because of my diamond piece, but I've been rich since I started finding peace. And I think that's that's my vibe today.
Well, that could be a podcast in and of itself, just digging into that.
Right, I think he said life is good. Maybe life is good. I think my life is good because of my diamond piece. But
all right, well, finding peace. That will be part of our round two. Is there anything else in terms of closing comments, suggestions, recommendations, asks of the audience that you'd like to add before we close up this first installment, at least?
Yeah, I think that what I would just say is the book is really, to enable you to do what you need to do kind of as a leader and as an organization to be who you want to be. And as a leader, I think that's the most important thing.
Wonderful. And that is What You Do Is Who You Are. You can find that anywhere books are sold. People can wave hello on the internet on Twitter at @bhorowitz, and we'll link to that and everything else in the show notes, including everything that we mentioned. So people listening can find that at tim.blog/podcast. Ben, this has really been a lot of fun and very enlightening and enlivening, and I have all sorts of notes to follow up on for my own research and reading. And so thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. And I am looking forward to round 2 and the cup of coffee.
Deal. Hey guys, this is Tim again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number 1, this is 5 Bullet Friday. Do you want to get a short email from me? Would you enjoy getting a short email from me every Friday that provides a little morsel of fun before the weekend? And 5 Bullet Friday is a very short email where I share the coolest things I've found or that I've been pondering over the week. That could include favorite new albums that I've discovered. It could include gizmos and gadgets and all sorts of weird shit that I've somehow dug up in the world of the esoteric as I do. It could include favorite articles that I've read and that I've shared with my close friends, for instance. And it's very short. It's just a little tiny bite of goodness before you head off for the weekend. So if you want to receive that, check it out. Just go to 4hourworkweek.com. That's 4hourworkweek.com, all spelled out, and just drop in your email and you will get the very next one. And if you sign up, I hope you enjoy it. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn's Hello Monday. Hello Monday is a podcast. Hello Monday with Jessi Hempel is back for season 2, and the show is full of advice, practical, tactical advice that you can start using today. Each week, Jessi sits down with featured guests to investigate the role work plays in their lives, how it can be integrated into your life, and how to make work for you better. This season, one of the first episodes is with Jerry Colonna, who's been called the CEO Whisperer. I've actually done quite a bit of work with Jerry, and he's one of the world's most in-demand executive coaches amongst the startup ecosystem. In the episode, Jerry shares his approach to meetings, explains how to ask good open-ended questions, and he also goes through his approach to daily journaling, among other things. Journaling can really create an incredible competitive advantage and also act as an emotional rebalancing tool of sorts. So I recommend taking a look at it, giving a listen more accurately. So whether you're starting your first job or gearing up for retirement, Hello Monday helps you tackle Monday and the rest of the work week with tactics and strategies that you can use. So check it out. Find Hello Monday with Jessi Hempel. That's JESSIHEMPEL. You can just look up Hello Monday on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. This episode of The Tim Ferriss Show is brought to you by Athletic Greens. I get asked all the time, if I could only take one supplement, what would it be? The answer is inevitably Athletic Greens. I view it as, and a lot of you now view it as, all-in-one nutritional insurance. I recommended it way back in 2010 in the 4-Hour Body, and I did not get paid to do so. I've been using it since before that, and I use it in a lot of different ways. I travel with it to avoid getting sick, or to help mitigate the likelihood of getting sick. I take it in the morning to ensure optimal performance, and overall, it covers my bases if I can't get what I need from whole food meals throughout the rest of the day. And if you want to give Athletic Greens a try, they're offering a free 20-count travel pack for first-time users. I nearly always travel with at least 3 or 4 of these one-dose bags. In other words, if you buy Athletic Greens as a first-time buyer, you now get, for a limited time, an extra $79 in free product. So check out the details at athleticgreens.com/Tim. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Tim for your free travel pack with any purchase.